The story I'm about to tell you, you may wonder what this possibly has to do with gender. And I'm just going to tell you to hang on because I will tell you what it has to do with gender. It goes beyond my usual feistiness and the history of me speaking up for what I think is not correct, and a demonstration of hopefully my progression of maturity of how I handle those things. But it does have to do with gender. So just listen and I will make that connection for you in just a bit. So when I was a resident, there was this common thing that I often heard that happened. And it's best demonstrated in this one time that I was fed up with it. I often said things, but I handled it maybe not my best way this one time. When my nurse asked me a question about my quote Spanish patient. Now, I only had one patient in the area where we were, and so I knew what patient she was referring to, but I looked at her confused. And I said, "Oh, I didn't I didn't know she was Spanish." And I don't remember where this patient was from at the time, but for the sake of this podcast, we'll say the Dominican Republic, because that was not an uncommon place for our patients to be from. So I said, "Oh, I didn't know she was Spanish. I thought she was Dominican." And the nurse looked at me confused. And I said, "Wait, did you just said she was Spanish, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Yeah." And I said, "Oh, I could have sworn she was Dominican." And the nurse continued to look at me confused. I said, "Well, you said she was Spanish, which would mean she was from Spain, but I thought she was from the Dominican Republic." Huh. I'll have to talk to her about that. And I think I answered her question and then I moved on. So her question got answered. Now, the thing was, this was not uncommon at the hospital I worked at, that any Spanish speaking patient was referred to as Spanish. But that's not the correct terminology. As I pointed out, when you refer to somebody as Spanish, it means they're from Spain. You can refer to them as a Spanish speaker, or sometimes people use the term Hispanic. But the term Spanish means they're from Spain. Now you might say, what's the big deal? That would be like if you're American and you're in a different country, they refer to you as English because you're English speaking. You may not like that very much because you're like, hey, we are English speaking. We are not English. We fought for our independence from England not to be called English. Well, many of the Latin American countries, not all, but many, including the Dominican, including where my ancestors are from, Mexico, fought for their independence from Spain. They may be Spanish speakers, but they are not Spanish. Okay, I promise to say what this has to do with gender. The point is, to that nurse and to many people that I worked with at that hospital, what's the difference? Same thing. Someone who is Spanish, Spanish speaker, what's the difference? Same thing. But there is a difference. Just like, as I pointed out, there is a difference between being an English speaker as an American versus being English. There is a difference. Just like there is a difference between gender and sex. Many people say, what's the big deal? There's no difference. Gender, sex, same thing. No, there is a difference. Sex is a biological characteristic. Gender is an internal sense of self. They are different. Now, that nurse may not have known, may not have realized that the term to refer to somebody as Spanish meant somebody from Spain, just like many times people don't realize that gender and sex are two different terms because many times in our society we have used them interchangeably, but they are not the same. You can decree as many laws as you want. It doesn't change the fact that they mean two different things. And there may be people, potentially that nurse, potentially others, that may not realize that there is a difference. It doesn't change the fact that sex and gender are two different things. One, a biological classification, the other an internal sense of self. And it may be true that, just like in that example, there are people from Spain who are Spanish speakers, of course. So you may call somebody who is a Spanish speaker Spanish, and it may be correct. They may be from Spain. So you might say that person is Spanish who is a Spanish speaker, and you're correct because they are from Spain. It may work out sometimes that those two things are correct. Just like gender and sex, somebody who is female can identify as a woman, like myself, and they match up. It's the same thing. So, yes, sometimes they're not different. It matches up. It doesn't change the fact that sex and gender are different, even if there are times where they line up. And in the hospital I worked with, one of my medical assistants in our clinic, she was Puerto Rican. She often referred to Spanish speakers as Spanish. So she herself was a Latina woman, and she often used the term Spanish, even though it was incorrect. We had a discussion about it one time. She acknowledged that what I said was true. People that are Spanish are from Spain. She didn't think it was a big deal. She continued to use it, and that's fine. That's her opinion. It doesn't change the fact that they are different. Just like I know, and I'm sure some of you know, there are transgender people that says, who cares? Who cares? Gender and sex, you're right. They're the same thing. You can use them interchangeably. It doesn't change the fact that they're not the same thing. It doesn't change the fact that gender and sex are different. Even if there are people who are transgender that say, oh, no, that's fine. You're right. It doesn't change the facts. Laws can be made. Important people that identify in different ways can say all the different things. It doesn't change the facts that gender and sex are different. This all came to mind when I recently did a research study from some college students that were working on a class learning about research design. And in the demographic section, they asked, how do you identify? And then in the potential answers, it was male, female, don't want to answer, and I don't remember what else. And I did more than one of these surveys from a couple different students. Same mistake in all of them. How do you identify, male, female? And I just nicely said, hey, just so you know, if you're asking someone how they identify, those are all gender identity questions, in which case then you're asking man, woman, non-binary, or any of the other gender identity terms. There's a whole list of them. Those are the terms you can use. But male and female are biological classifications, which are sex. And depending on which demographic you want to collect, that you want to study, that you want to keep track of, it's really important to know. Because if you want to keep track of the sex of the people responding, then you need to ask what people's sex are, what they were assigned at birth, in which case you want to ask male, female, intersex, prefer not to answer, etc. But you need to make it clear. They are different. They were very receptive and thanked me for my expertise in explaining it. But I thought about it. I wondered if they're under the pressure, if the department's under the pressure of the executive order and all the statements there. But I thought, regardless of the executive order, it doesn't change the fact that gender and sex are different. And if you're going to ask a question on your demographics, then you want to keep it consistent. If you want to know the sex of those responding, then ask questions using languages that are consistent with those biological characteristics. And if you want to know the gender identity of those that are answering, then keep your language consistent with gender identity. No law, no decree, no anything changes the fact that gender and sex are different. And especially when it comes to research, it matters. You need to know what you're asking and what you're studying. What data do you want to collect? What data do you want to know so that you ask the question and the options you give are consistent? Otherwise, you're asking two different questions. What am I supposed to answer? Which one do you want to know? Just because people say they're the same thing, just because people think they're the same thing, just because people go on comments and spew a bunch of things does not change the biological fact of the definitions that sex is a biological classification and gender is an inner sense of self. Nothing changes those facts. No matter who agrees with it, no matter whether people understand it or have the knowledge or not, no matter if sometimes they align with each other, it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that they are different things. Because definition matters.